Good evening, friends, and welcome to this webinar offered in preparation for our annual conference. Let us begin with prayer. Almighty God of light and love, we pause once again this day, as we've been doing since early this morning, to acknowledge your presence and to praise your name. Open our hearts, O Lord, to the voice of your word. May your word be the seed that restores our fallen world. Grant us the gift of obedience as you teach us compassion toward every human need. We see your grace in all who have given themselves to the ministry of Christ through the church. We're grateful for our laity and our clergy who serve you, especially those who have been at work to prepare for our annual conference. Make us true to your word, that our worship and our lives might give you delight through Christ our Lord. Amen. Thank you for being present this evening. We want to welcome you to this webinar. While clergy and lay members to the annual conference have specifically been invited to this webinar, we welcome all members of our conference who may wish to receive this additional information. This evening, I'm joined by Reverend Kim Ingram, Director of our Ministerial Services, and Mrs. Jennifer Davis. Kim Ingram works in our conference staff as the staff person who's assigned to resource our Board of Ordained Ministry, and as the staff person assigned to our leadership development team. And Jennifer Davis has retired from a full career with IBM. She's a faithful and active United Methodist. She's also served in our Western North Carolina Conference staff. And after retirement, she's now engaged in consulting work. Jennifer leads the lay side of our delegation to the general and jurisdictional conferences, while Kim leads the clergy delegation to these conferences. And I'm going to ask Kim to offer an introduction of the content of this webinar.
Good evening, friends. It's good to be here together with you tonight. Just checking that I remembered to unmute. Tonight, we're going to talk some about what's been happening in the last year throughout the United Methodist Church. We all know that the pandemic has affected the way the conferences were scheduled to happen. And as you know, we met for annual conference last year virtually, and we'll do so again on Saturday. We've all had to adapt to these ever-changing circumstances. That's true for the United Methodist Church as well. Pre-pandemic, many people expected that by now, decisions would have been made about how the church would move forward on many things, including gay marriage and ordination. Tonight, we'll talk about the changes that occurred and what we can expect moving forward. Unexpected circumstances can bring about unexpected opportunities. May the Holy Spirit act in this time we have for discovery and discernment. May our love for God and one another increase. May our witness in our communities be faithful and fruitful. At the end of the presentation tonight, there will be a time for questions and answers. We ask that you submit your questions using the Q&A function that you will find rather than putting them in the chat. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Connection Points webpage tomorrow afternoon. And just a reminder, you can find out all of the information about annual conference on the annual conference webpage, which is www.ac2021.org, and on the conference website. Thank you for being a part of this connection point.
Thank you, Kim. Let me share a brief word about General Conference, which meets once every 4 years. And I'm speaking because I know that not everybody is fully familiar or aware of the responsibilities of the General Conference. The General Conference is represented by all United Methodist annual conferences worldwide, which includes the Philippines, Eurasia, Europe, Africa, and the United States. Members of the General Conference represent an equal number of lay members and clergy elected by each annual conference to represent their conferences at the General Conference. The work of the General Conference includes providing for the organization and administration of the work of local churches. It defines the responsibilities of church conferences and charge conferences, annual conferences. It defines election and responsibilities of bishops, to provide for the raising and distribution of funds necessary to carry out the work of the church, and to establish the commissions for the general work of the church. Initially, our general conference had been scheduled for May 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. As a result of the pandemic, it was postponed until August and September of this year in 2021. But it was postponed a second time until August, September of 2022 next year, because one of the responsibilities of the General Conference is to ensure that all members of the conference have equal access to participate. And many of the churches in our central conferences could not be assured of this due to visas, the pandemic, and travel restrictions, which led to the second postponement. Kim, you might want to share some information about the legislation that's been submitted to General Conference.
So the legislation that is considered by the General Conference was submitted by a deadline that was for the 2020 meeting. The legislation that is submitted will be divided up in between these committees that you see in front of us. This is a list of the legislative committees. The first one, Church and Society, has 3 different committees, and that legislation is divided up among them. And then each of the others is a legislative committee, which is a different area of ministry or work of the church. There are delegates on each of these committees. So when the legislation goes to the committee, we meet by legislative committee for the first several days of the General Conference meeting. And whatever legislation has been assigned to our committee, we discuss and make a decision about whether or not it goes on the consent calendar, whether or not it will go to the floor of the General Conference, or whether it will fail. Now, all legislation that comes out of committee or doesn't come out of committee can still, there's a process by which it could come back to the floor. This legislation can be submitted by individuals, it can be submitted by churches, it can be submitted by general boards and agencies. So there's a lot of legislation, 2 books worth of legislation that comes to the General Conference meeting. But the deadline passed, and the General Conference Committee has said that there cannot be any new legislation submitted at this point to the General Conference. They're not calling it the 2022 General Conference, they're calling it the postponed 2020 General Conference. And as such, then all of the legislation previously submitted is all that we'll be able to consider. Now, I know many people are interested in the protocol legislation. It's called the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation. And what this is, you may remember, it was a formal agreement that was decided on by a group of 16 people. They were self-organized, but they represented different perspectives and kind of across the spectrum of the denomination from the United States and from the central conferences. They came to an agreement on the legislation through a professional mediator that they used to help decide kind of what the outcome or what the final legislation would look like. And it allows for restructuring to form a new Methodist denomination. It also allows for individuals, churches, and conferences to leave the United Methodist Church. It gives the new denominations that might form some money, kind of like startup money. And it sets aside $39 million over 8 years to support communities historically marginalized by the sin of racism. So that's a little bit about what the content of the protocol is. You can see at the bottom of this slide that you can go to www.gracethroughseparation.com to read a whole lot more about it. But the legislation for the protocol was submitted in January of 2020. That was past the regular deadline for legislation to be submitted to the General Conference. But the Book of Discipline allows for annual conferences to submit legislation closer to General Conference than the regular deadline. And so the protocol, after it was made public in January of 2020, it was affirmed by the Michigan Annual Conference, the Sierra Leone Annual Conference, and the Philippines Cavite Annual Conference. So that made it legitimate legislation to come before the General Conference meeting. Now, it has not been reviewed by the Judicial Council for constitutionality. And for legislation to actually become kind of church law, it has to be constitutional. And so that's another part of the process that might happen down the road. We do expect that it will be on the agenda for the general conference when it meets in 2022. But it hasn't been assigned to a legislative committee yet. So we're not sure which legislative committee will receive and review the protocol prior to it being considered by the full general conference meeting. Now, all legislation is open for amendments by the general conference. I received an email this week where somebody asked me, did I think it would pass? And did I think there would be changes to it? And there's just no way to know, because 850 people are going to come together and make decisions about it. And so only when it finally hits the floor of the general conference will we know what will happen to it. Jennifer, will you talk to us a little bit about the delegates? Jennifer?
Okay, can you hear me okay now?
We can now.
Okay, I've got this issue going on with my internet, but it asked me to unmute. I thought I was talking through my phone, but here we go. And thank you, Kim, for this. So let me just share a little bit about our delegation, about the delegations in general. And then I'll share with you also some things that we have been doing locally with the delegation from the Western North Carolina Conference. So there are 10 delegates that come from what are called concordant churches. And those are churches that are related to the United Methodist Church, but not from the United Methodist Church, or are not fully United Methodist churches as we understand them. And for example, the United Methodist Church in Puerto Rico is one of those. There are 134 conferences that are represented in the United Methodist Church, and they come from the United States, Africa, the Philippines, and Europe. And I think both Kim and Bishop Leeland have shared that with you in their conversation. The total number of delegates is 862. 55.9%, or almost 56% of them, come from the United States. 32% of the delegates come from Africa. 6% come from the Philippines, and 4.6% come from Europe and the Concord churches. In Western North Carolina, our delegates, here's the delegate representation that we have. We have 10 lay people and 10 clergy people for general conference. Then we have an additional 10 laity and 10 clergy who will also attend the jurisdictional conference with the 10 laity and 10 clergy that were elected for general conference. And then we have alternates or reserves, 3 laity and 3 clergy reserves that have also been elected. And we were elected in 2016. By the time we get to general conference, we will have made history, if we're not making history already, because we'll be the longest serving delegation, I think, that in our lifetime that we can remember. But the pandemic has shifted a lot of things. So our delegation, our delegation meets monthly, and I want to share with you a little bit about what we have been doing in our meetings, some of the discussions that we've had, some of the things that we've been trying to do to keep delegates in touch with what's going on. It's been we've done our meetings via Zoom. I can't remember the last time. It's been over a year since we met in person. But in general, what we have attempted to do, and Amy Coles, Kim, and I serve as the leadership team for the delegation, we have attempted to keep the delegation informed about what's going on as it relates to jurisdictional and general conference. And most of that conversation has revolved around, or a lot of that conversation has revolved around the ever-shifting timeline for both of these and what can or cannot or might happen until those conferences are held. We expect that delegations are doing the very important work of orienting all delegates to the work of the general and jurisdictional conferences, and that is what we have been trying to do. We have had discussions about intersectionality. Intersectionality is about how if you don't know anything about that, it's about how all of our identities about gender, class, race, and sexuality, our life experiences, how they affect and inform our interactions in the world. All of us know that we walk through whatever our world is every day, and there are endless possible combinations of outcomes depending on how individual events and situations interact with our individual identities. In one meeting, we sought input from our delegates about our strengths and our needs as a conference, especially during this interim period of coverage after Bishop Leeland retires in September of this year until we can hold general conference and jurisdictional conference in 2022. That happened to be one of several conversations that Kim and I were involved in. And as a result, it led us into more conversations in our local delegation about how to communicate with our constituents as we wait and prepare for general and jurisdictional conferences in 2022. We've had guest presenters come in. Last month, we had Derek Scott, who's a layperson from Florida Conference, talk to us about some ideas around a U.S. General Conference. And what we have done for this summer is created some summer groups who will be meeting as they are able, and they will bring back topics for us that maybe we as an entire delegation will want to discuss a little further. We hope that in October of this year, we will have our first meeting in person in over a year. Oh, Kim, you want me to go ahead and talk about jurisdictional conference?
Yeah, we'll go there next, Jennifer.
Okay, so I'll give it back to you.
Nope, it's yours.
Okay, all right, so originally, our jurisdictional conference would have been in July of this year. And again, because of the pandemic, that has all been postponed. So in the United States, we have 5 jurisdictions. And again, those areas that are outside the United States are called central conferences. Western North Carolina is a part of the Southeastern Jurisdiction. And in our jurisdiction, we have 15 annual conferences and 13 Episcopal areas. And heretofore, we've had 13 Episcopal leaders. 2 of our bishops, Bishop McAlealy and Bishop Fairley, serve 2 conferences each. So the Southeastern Jurisdictional Conference that was scheduled for July 2020 was obviously postponed. And our next regular session is not scheduled until after General Conference, which will be in November, and it actually is November 2nd through the 4th in 2022. But we will have a call session on July 21st, and I believe Kim is going to cover the agenda for that and talk about what that call session will be held for.
So normally when we have a regular session of a jurisdictional conference, the primary purpose is to elect bishops. And we do worship and there is some jurisdictional business. But for a called session of jurisdictional conference or a called session actually of any kind of conference, there's a specific agenda that has to be identified by the group that calls it, which is either the Council of Bishops, the College of Bishops, or the bishop, depending on which of the conferences is called. But in this case, it's a called session of the jurisdictional conference. And so the College of Bishops, which are the bishops in the Southeastern jurisdiction, called the session and set the agenda. And there are 2 primary agenda items for this called session in July. The first one is the formation of the Tennessee Western Kentucky Conference. So currently we have a Memphis and Tennessee conference, and they are going 2 different conferences, and they are going to become one conference called Tennessee Western Kentucky. Now, both of those annual conferences have already approved this joining of the conferences, but it requires the jurisdictional conference approval as well. And so one of the agenda items when we meet in July, which will just be a short meeting, it will be virtual, it will be about 90 minutes, will be to approve or affirm this joining of these 2 annual conferences. The second primary agenda item for the jurisdictional conference in July is to receive a report from the jurisdiction on the pandemic response and the anti-racism efforts, as well as what the work of the jurisdiction will be moving forward for the next 18 months. And then finally, there will be some worship, and I believe it's going to be worship at the beginning and worship at the end. And it will include the recognition of the retiring bishops and as well as remembering the deceased bishops. I'm pretty sure that anybody can watch the jurisdictional conference. So if it's something you're interested in, you should be able to join on that date. Now, we do have 4 bishops who are retiring in the Southeastern jurisdiction. And those are Bishop Leeland, who has done a fabulous job of serving among us in Western North Carolina. Bishop Hope Morgan Ward, who is serving currently in the North Carolina Conference. Bishop Virginia Taylor, who serves in the Holston Conference. And Bishop Lawson Bryan, who serves in the South Georgia Conference. Bishop.
Yeah, let me just say a word. The General Conference sets the maximum number of bishops that can be elected. And the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy recommends the number of bishops to be elected within the jurisdiction. And so there's been a lot of discussion related to that over the last year in terms of the number of bishops needed in the Southeast. But the role of the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy in a regular session would assign the bishops to their respective areas after all the bishops have been elected. In addition, the Committee on Episcopacy offers consultation regarding the boundaries of the episcopal areas. For example, when Bishop Ernest Fitzgerald, who was elected out of this conference, was assigned to an episcopal area that had 2 conferences, he served the North Georgia Conference and the South Georgia Conference. There were 2 conferences within that episcopal area. So the role of the College of Bishops, when a vacancy is created in between the normal sessions, such as the need for medical leave or retirement, is to recommend to the Council of Bishops how the areas will be covered during the interim changes. The interim bishops at this time will cover the areas from September the 1st of this year, 2021, to December 31st, 2022, the end of next year. There are currently 4 areas that will be vacated by these retirements, as Kim just reminded you. The Holston Conference, because of Bishop Taylor's retirement, will be covered by Bishop Wallace Padgett, who will also serve the North Alabama Conference, where she's currently assigned. The North Carolina Conference, because of Bishop Ward's retirement, will be covered by Bishop Fairley, who will continue to serve the Kentucky Conference. The Western North Carolina Conference, where I'm retiring. I think I'm the only bishop retiring with mandatory retirement. I say that so the others won't disparage their age. But because of my retirement, will be covered by Bishop Carter, who will continue to serve the Florida Conference. The South Georgia Conference, where Bishop Bryan is retiring, will be covered by Bishop Graves, who will continue to serve the Alabama West Florida Conference as well. Each of these bishops retiring, like myself, who would have retired last August in 2020, continued for a few additional months because of the pandemic as we move through the postponement of a jurisdictional conference. It's been my privilege to serve as your bishop, as Janet and I give thanks for you and the gracious generosity of the Western North Carolina Conference. Thank you, thank you.
So now we're going to come to a time of question and answers. I remind you that if you'll put your questions in the Q&A, that's easier than having them in the chat and trying to scroll through the chat to find them. Bishop Leeland, I think this first question is going to be for you. And the question is, are the Western North Carolina churches that are disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church doing so because of the issue of LGBTQ inclusion, ordination, and marriage?
We've had very few churches that have disaffiliated so far. We had 7 last year. Most all those churches were small membership churches. This year, I believe, for annual conference, there are 16 churches that are disaffiliating. But in most all of these cases, have not been identifying the issue around the LGBTQ concerns. Most all of these disaffiliations have primarily been around congregations that want to be independent. They want to just be independent congregations that are not related to a larger denomination. That's the majority of the people that are disaffiliating. Now, that's not to say that that won't change following what comes out of General Conference, and that's what Kim said earlier. We don't know how 850 laity and clergy will address these issues and provide opportunities for conversation about the way in which we move together.
I'm looking, but I don't think we have any more questions. I do want to say there was something in the chat just to the panelists, and I can't figure out how to respond directly to the person who wrote it, but that there was a concern that we couldn't, or that you couldn't hear Jennifer very well, and it felt like we were both wasting your time and not valuing her. And I just want to say I'm sorry about that. We do have a tech person who has been following this, and he on his device you can hear Jennifer. And I've been able to hear Jennifer. So I'm sorry for those of you who haven't been able to hear her, and hopefully in the recording we've captured that, and you could go back and watch the recording tomorrow and get all of it if you weren't able to hear it on your own devices tonight.
Good.
Wait, there's another question. Can we have a text of Jennifer's report? I don't know if Jennifer did it off the cuff or had it typed, but if she has it typed, we'll try to do something with it. But there again, I think that the best bet will be to try to listen to it and be able to watch it again.
So I did type type a few of those notes, but if anybody can't hear it on the recording, you can reach me. You can get my email and reach me, and I'll be happy to send you any information or answer any questions I can for you about the activities of the delegation over the past year.
Okay, we do have another question. They just keep coming in. Have there been any major changes in the LGBTQ issues that are before the General Conference? Jennifer, do you think you can answer that?
Let me find that question. Have there been any major change? None that I can say any major changes. It continues to be a topic of discussion in the conference among the delegates and certainly among all our churches, but I don't know of any major changes that have occurred that are related to this topic. I will say this about our delegation. I know you all, and maybe you all don't know, we have a very energetic and probably one of the youngest generations by age that I can recall in my time in doing this, but very energetic, very eager and willing to engage in difficult conversations. And we have tried to model that, whether it's about race or gender issues or anything else, but primarily, these delegates are so focused on finding ways to stay in ministry and mission as the United Methodist Church that I don't notice that any one topic has overridden any other. I think there are some priorities that we've discussed. We've discussed racism. We've discussed intersectionality issues, which certainly can include race, age, gender, and all of those. But no, I don't see any major shifts in that. Bishop or Kim, have you?
Say that other than the traditional legislation that comes around these issues every 4 years, we'll see some of that again. One of the contributions that the protocol has provided for the church is that it has refocused the conversation around how we might allow congregations who are not comfortable with the position of the United Methodist Church to separate or disaffiliate from the denomination. The only thing that I've been pointing to is the response of the Judicial Council that reviewed the protocol. And I encourage you to go back and just look at the Judicial Council's review of the protocol. But the one thing that they did say is that it's not likely that the protocol would emerge out of the General Conference intact as it was presented. So again, I don't know how the 850 delegates, lay and clergy delegates, would address that issue, but I'm not seeing or not aware of any specific legislations that's different than what we've seen in the past.
So there is somebody who is with us that's raising their hand to ask a question. Monica Childers, Chris is going to give you the microphone if you want to ask it out loud. Or maybe you didn't actually mean to raise your hand. Monica is our chair of the Order of Deacons. So Monica, if you do want to, we're going to put your hand down now and you can let us know again. Okay, we have questions rolling in. The next one I think I can answer. It says, I may have missed it, but will the bishops who will be serving in the interim continue, or will there be an election in 2022? Right now, we do have a jurisdictional conference scheduled for November of 2022. And right now, the plan is, well, the possibility is to elect bishops. The Committee on Episcopacy will recommend to the jurisdictional conference how many bishops might be elected. The jurisdictional conference makes the final decision about how many bishops are elected. And if we elect bishops, it will happen then. And after any bishops that we are electing are elected, then the assignments happen. And so it could be that people who are serving in the interim continue to serve, or it could be that people who are serving in the interim serve in a different annual conference. And we really won't know all of that until next fall.
Kim, I would like to add to that. It may be helpful for those of us on this webinar tonight to realize these assignments that we made you aware of, that there's a difference between coverage of an area that's vacated and assignments. And what we have at the moment is a coverage of the area. The assignments for the annual conferences will actually be made following the jurisdictional conference in 2022. So we can't tell for sure what the Jurisdictional Committee on Episcopacy may decide to do at that point in time, because there are many, many factors like the number of bishops that would be elected in light of the number of annual conferences that we have.
Okay, Bishop, the next question is for you. When does the Judicial Council make decisions or judgments on constitutional issues like the protocol? Is it only at General Conference? That would seem inefficient.
Yeah, you're right. They don't do this just at General Conference. The Jurisdictional Conference is scheduled to meet twice a year. And so I believe the next time under their normal schedule would be in October, when they would meet following all the annual conferences once those conferences are completed.
I thought that there was something in news service that said they would be meeting this spring. And I know there were a couple of things that came out, but I'm not sure that they actually had a full meeting this spring. They did not meet on their regular schedule during the pandemic. Okay, the next question, Bishop, I'm going to give this one to you as well. Looking at the agenda for the Western North Carolina Annual Conference, I don't see anything that is likely to be controversial. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I don't know. It may depend on who you ask. Even the budget can be controversial, or the past service year rate for clergy who have served the conference set by the Board of Pensions may be controversial. It's really unusual time that we've had to use the platform we've used for annual conference because we don't have the flexibility to have people come to the floor and raise additional questions or to raise substitutions or amendments. And so we'll just present the things that the conference must vote on, the things that the discipline requires annual conferences to address, like the reception of new members into the conference, the budget, the past service year rate, the recognition of those who retire. There are things that we must do every year. And those things generally are not controversial. So I wouldn't say that there's nothing that is not controversial, but I hope that it's straightforward and easy to understand. The material is there for people to review before they get to annual conference.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, this one's for you. Have the delegates discussed the possible formation of the Global Methodist Church?
If we did, I missed that meeting. No, we have not. I mean, we've been struggling so much with the local and the United Methodist, the United States, no, we have really tried to focus in on issues that will come to us at General Conference, to prepare for that, as well as Jurisdictional Conference, to acclimate or to really get our new delegates, because we have a lot who have never attended the conference before, but to prepare them for this. And no, we have not talked about the possibility of forming any kind of global conference. It may have been one of those things that comes up and you say, oh, maybe this will happen, but no, I mean, that's just kind of beyond our wheelhouse that we could even impact at this point. So no, that hasn't happened.
So I will say that we did, and it probably was February of 2020, have a presentation on the protocol. And so the global method, for those people who haven't followed this, the WCA, or the Wesleyan Covenant Association, is the organization that is putting together an alternative denomination. And so the protocol included people who were from the perspective of the WCA, and people who wanted to be continuing United Methodist as centrists, and people who might be viewed as being kind of on left of center. And so the protocol would have sort of been related to what this question is asking. The Global Methodist Church is the name of the new denomination that the WCA is planning to establish. And so I would say, Jennifer, I would agree with Jennifer that we really haven't gotten into conversation about the Global Methodist Church or what the alternatives might be and who might do what. We've really tried to focus on our work as a delegation, and that's really outside the purview of our work as a delegation.
Yeah, and I really didn't. I hope not to be misleading. We've had information about it, but we haven't discussed it. So thank you, Kim, for clarifying that.
So Bishop, this one is for you. It says, as a retired bishop, what role will you have in the General and Jurisdictional Conference? I think is the question.
Well, my primary goal in retirement is going to be to spend more time with my wife and my family and my friends. I will follow the example of Bishop Paul Duffy, who is now deceased, but was a wonderful bishop in the United Methodist Church. Bishop Duffy was supportive of his conference. He was supportive of whoever the bishop was that was assigned to his conference, and supportive of the United Methodist Ministries. And that's what I will see as my role. I continue, fortunately, to be on the Council of Bishops, but even in retirement. But I hope to be an encourager and a cheerleader, and hopefully even a mentor for those, for that next generation along behind me.
And Bishop, are you going to continue on Westpath?
Yes, I've been assigned to Westpath for the quadrennium, and this will be my third quadrennium with Westpath, and I continue to serve with Westpath and will through the rest of this quadrennium.
So I don't know who wants to answer the next question, but the question is, will there be a split in the United Methodist Church?
I will just say, offer an impression here, and that is that there are areas of the country where some conferences indicate that they may have more churches leave than they want to leave. If you look at the Western North Carolina Conference, we probably will have some churches leave that I don't want to leave. I hope we won't leave. And we'll have more churches stay than people think. But while we want to be graceful about those individuals and congregations that make a decision to leave, and I hope God will allow me to be a dispenser of grace myself, my hope is that like the Great Reformation of the church, there were many pastors, priests, and theologians who did not protest and break away with the Protestants, but tried to reform the church from within. And that's the way that I feel God nudging my spirit, to be a reformer from within the church. And I pray that all of us will continue to make the church a better place. So my statement when people have asked me, just to answer that question, is we'll have more people leave than we want to leave. And we will not have as many people leave as people think are going to leave.
And so, Bishop, I want to chime in on this. I've looked at it. I don't know what they mean by a split in the United Methodist Church. I think there already is, because we're divided on our opinions about a variety of things. But I am encouraged by some of the work that I see some of our local churches doing to bring their conversations together around difficult conversations, and what is going on in the church as well as in our society. There's more of that happening, I think, than we believe, and I have been offered opportunities to kind of share in that. So we're a split society, so yes, we're going to be a split church. I am hopeful that people will stay and just adhere to our mission to make disciples of Jesus Christ, because ultimately that's what we're about. I think that's what we're all about. And I'll shut up now.
So while we're on this subject, I'm going to go ahead and read a question that's not the next one, but it says, assuming some decision surrounding the protocol is made at General Conference in 2022, how long do you estimate it might be before it comes down to local congregations to decide? And I have the Q&A for the protocol pulled up. I'm going to post it in the chat. It was posted in news service, but it might be helpful. There is toward the end of it the question, and I'm sorry, I haven't studied the protocol in a good while, so I can't give you exact dates, but it does say there's a question about what does it mean for local churches and annual conferences. It says if a local church or annual conference wish to remain within the United Methodist Church, there's no action required. If they wish to affiliate with another Methodist denomination, there's a clearly stated process that will enable them to do so. And if a local church or annual conference wishes to disaffiliate altogether, then there's a process in the Book of Discipline that allows that. Says beyond the decision-making process, local churches and annual conferences that remain should be prepared for changes that will likely occur in things like reconstituted boundaries, structures to be reevaluated and streamlined, and financial obligations that will need to be adjusted as a result of losses sustained by churches and annual conferences. So it's not the timeline. You'll have to look at the protocol legislation that was in the PowerPoint. Separation of, I'll put it back in the chat in a minute, but that does give you an idea of the implications for the local churches. So Bishop Leeland, this one's for you. What advice can Bishop Leeland offer to those who are leading anxious congregations, and then in parentheses, anxious about their own viability and anxious about the future of the denomination?
Be at peace, let not your heart be troubled. I would remind ourselves to keep our eyes focused on Christ and the teachings of Christ. If we would continue to teach and preach the Jesus of the scriptures and the creeds, rather than trying to shape the theology of the church to match the controversial issues in our lives, I think that the church would be closer to its mission. There is anxiety in the church, among a number of pastors, because the expectation seems to be greater for pastors to have to declare the way that they think and feel around specific issues, and pastors are concerned about whether that's going to be able to be accepted and embraced by the congregation to which they are assigned and want to work with. So I would say, but don't be anxious about that. The second thing I would say is that it's always helpful, and was with me, that I've been a part of a covenant group, where I was until the time I was elected to the role I'm in now, where I was in the same covenant group for 20 some years. Bishop Pope Morgan Ward was in that same group with me. And it's important to have colleagues around you, people that think positively and encourage you, so that you're not out there feeling so isolated and alone in terms of the work that you have to do, especially if you feel that you're not in alignment with all of the leadership of the congregation to which you're appointed.
Okay, thank you. So this question, Jennifer, either one of you, if you can answer it. In the future, will there be an expiration in the number of terms a delegate can serve?
I have no idea, and I don't know if you're talking about the number of terms or the length of the terms, but I don't see anything that says nor have I been part of any discussion that says that will be the case. And Bishop, maybe you know something different, but.
No, my mind goes to the fact that I've known people in every conference I've served that have been elected quadrennium after quadrennium after quadrennium to continue to represent their conference at the general conference and jurisdictional conferences. I don't think that we're going to limit that. I would be surprised if the general conference limited that, but that's always a decision for the annual conference. Because you continue to go to the same people over and over, then with the limited number of opportunities you have, you never bring on board new people and new leaders that are coming into the conference all the time and giving other people an opportunity to serve in those kind of capacities. So I've often said since I've been here, let's continue to remind ourselves through the nominations process, and this is true of our election of delegates as well, that we've had many people come into the conference, new members, elders, and deacons that have come into the conference that have not been given an opportunity for leadership yet. And that's always a decision of the conference, the nominating committee, and the delegates, the lay members, Daniel, and clergy members when they vote for their delegates.
So the next question is, and Bishop Leeland, I'll send this one to you. How can we be faithful witnesses to Christ in this middle time?
Well, I think the hard work from my point of view, and this is just my bias, is that if we immerse ourselves into Christian character, the fruit of the Spirit, can you imagine, whether, regardless of the social context or issues that we talk about, if we were more patient, generous, kind, loving, forgiving, how that kind of spirit would impact our conversations and the way we relate to other people? Christian character, from my point of view, is the primary work of sanctification in the work of the church once people have decided to follow the life and the teachings of Jesus. And that is where I find that many churches are addressing many of the issues that we live with, but I don't always hear the balance of the reason we engage those issues the way we do is because, and it has to do with our calling and our Christian character. So I would encourage the church, regardless of annual conference, and really regardless of denomination, I would encourage the Christian church to focus its energy on Christian formation. And that would address many of the issues from personal family issues right into our community life.
Thank you. So Jennifer Mann, I'm going to call on you next. You have your hand raised, so I wanted you to be ready, but I'll ask this question. Will the structure of conference staff be adjusted for bishops serving 2 conferences in interim period before general conference? That is, will there be additional or supplemental assistance to aid bishops doing double duty?
Well, those discussions have been a bit preliminary, or that discussion has been a bit preliminary. I do think, and this is more of a personal opinion than anything that has been cast in concrete. I do think that there will be some adjustments in terms of assistance that might need to be provided. And that doesn't mean that people are going to leave, or maybe doesn't even mean that we're going to have to hire anyone. I don't think we're at that point yet, but I think it's going to be up to the annual conferences to just kind of make some adjustments during this period, and we will see what's necessary to keep our conferences running efficiently and effectively and doing the right things as we are in mission. Now, I will say this, that in Western North Carolina, we have been blessed with good leadership, and we have grown good leadership. We have great lay people as well as clergy. And I would think, and my experience has been, that when you call on them and ask them to do something extra to help, they always say yes. And I do think that is, I think we look forward to that. I think those are discussions that are yet to happen.
So Jennifer Mann, are you where we can invite you into the conversation? Do you have a question you want to ask? Okay, I'm thinking maybe that was an accident, or you can put it in the chat. So we just have a couple more questions. We will finish by 8. The next question, do you anticipate efforts to plant new churches in those locations where current United Methodist churches decide to depart the congregation or the annual conference?
I'll speak just very quickly to that, Kim. That is on a case-by-case basis and related to the demographics of the area. Our Conference Committee on Church Vitality is doing an excellent job of defining those areas where we need to start new congregations. It's one of the best methods we have of adding new disciples to the church. During the time that I've been here, we've started 15 new congregations, 4 of which just this past year were all churches of diversity. But the primary question here in my mind, as I'm hearing it, is that if churches decide to disaffiliate or leave, would we continue to put another United Methodist Church into that area? And that would have to be a review by the district committee on church location and building, the district superintendent, and the conference committee on congregational vitality.
And Bishop, I would hope that as that happens, there are other churches in the same community or in the area, and that those persons might become a welcoming place for persons in the church that disaffiliated that perhaps want to stay with the United Methodist Church, or that can reach out in that same community to encourage others to be a part of the United Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
So the last question that we have for this evening is around the scriptural references or scriptural understanding as it relates to LGBTQ. And I am going to put a link to the conference website. We have a page that is titled The Special Session of the General Conference of the United Methodist Church 2019. There's a lot of information on that page. Under the Other Resources red button, you will find lots of resources, but if you scroll down, you will find resources from a progressive perspective, and you will find resources from a traditional perspective, and you will find resources from an alternative perspective or covering multiple perspectives, and you will find small group studies. So while we don't have time for that conversation at length tonight, there are a number of resources that you can find on the conference website that gives some insight into that. And that's all the questions that we have.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of those who joined us this evening. At one point, I saw 164 people who were participating. That is great. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your participation and your attention. And please just stay safe. Stay out of the heat, and we'll see you soon. Hope to see you at annual conference on Saturday.
And come back tomorrow night for the next connection points. It will be related to Haywood Street and the fresco mural that they have. And on Thursday night, we'll have a connection point with awards night, giving out awards to a number of different entities within the annual conference. So 7 o'clock tomorrow night at this same link, and 7 o'clock on Thursday night at this same link.
Oh, we had over 200. Somebody said we had another 40 people on Facebook. So 164. Good session. Thank y'all all so much. Have a great evening and see you tomorrow night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.